This is the first of an occasional series for those who are new to Linux. In this video, I'll recount how I got started with Linux and why I switched. Your needs and circumstances may be different, but consider this a case study which may be helpful for some who are new to Linux. In 2007, I bought a new laptop with Windows Vista installed. I had been using Windows XP. I installed Microsoft Office 2003 on the new computer. About a year later, I bought a copy of Microsoft Office 2007, the first version that used the ribbon interface. I was used to the traditional menu structure and found that the ribbon interface was counterintuitive and slowed me down. After using it for a year, I still could not get used to it, and it continued to slow me down. Since I used Office applications in my small business, time was money and productivity was important. In addition, Windows Vista itself was slowing me down. The constant interruptions to update at the convenience of Microsoft, not at my convenience, were a growing irritant. I would turn on the computer hoping to get something done, and it would insist on installing updates before I could begin my work. And like all versions of Windows, it started out fast and gradually slowed to a crawl as the disk became fragmented. Defragmentation also took time and was risky, and even Microsoft admitted later that Vista was poorly designed and difficult to use. In 2009, I began to look for other Office software. While updating my installation of JavaScript, which was then produced by Sun Microsystems, I was watching their advertising that played during the updating, and I noticed something called OpenOffice.org, which was available free from Sun Microsystems. I downloaded a copy and tried it out. I found it largely compatible with my Microsoft Office documents, and it used the traditional menu structure that I preferred. The main thing that was incompatible was the macro language, but I didn't have many documents with embedded macros, so I switched from Office 2007 to OpenOffice.org and noticed that it was also available for Linux. I began to look for other software that was cross-platform, that would work with both Windows and Linux. One of my hobbies is composing music and also producing digital realizations of music composed by others. I found MuseScore, which was also cross-platform, and started using it. I used 2D CAD software in my work, and the programs I used were not available for Linux, but I found that QCAD was cross-platform and also used the DXF file transfer format, which allowed me to transfer files to and from other CAD programs and share files with colleagues who used other CAD programs. QCAD was not free, but it was not expensive either. Photography is another of my hobbies, so I also tried GIMP photo editing software, which was cross-platform and free. In May of 2009, I decided to try Linux itself. I learned what I could from the internet and chose Ubuntu 9.04 as the best distribution for my purposes. I did not have a spare computer, so there were 3 ways I could install it: side by side with Windows, in a virtual machine, or on an external hard drive. To run a virtual machine, you need a multi-core processor capable of virtualization, and I didn't have one. I also had little spare room on my internal hard drive, so I decided to buy an external hard drive and install Linux on that. In those days, the best advice was to remove the internal drive first, so there would be no danger of Linux accidentally damaging the Windows installation. I had taken apart desktop computers before, but never a laptop, so I was a little nervous about trying that, but I found instructions on the internet and decided to risk it. It went well and boosted my confidence about future such procedures. Removing the internal drive is no longer required for installing Linux on an external drive. Since I was using this installation for actual work in my small business, as well as for my hobbies, I shared my data between Linux and Windows. Linux could read and write data stored on the Windows NTFS file system, but Windows could not recognize the Linux ext4 file system, so I kept my data files on the Windows disk. Not only could Linux access the data, but it could see details of the Windows installation that were not accessible to Windows itself. In those days, Ubuntu could not recognize my laptop's proprietary wireless adapter, so I bought a USB adapter that was compatible with Linux. By the fall of 2009, Ubuntu did recognize my internal wireless, and I no longer had to use the USB stick. When Ubuntu 9.10 was issued, I upgraded in place. It worked well, but since then I have found it faster to do a fresh installation of the new versions. Over the first year, I found myself using Ubuntu more and more and Windows less and less. When Ubuntu 10.04 is released, I removed the internal drive containing Windows Vista and replaced it with a new hard drive on which I installed Linux alone. Later, when that laptop started giving me problems, I bought a new one with Windows 7 installed, wiped the disk, and installed Linux on it. I then reinstalled the Vista disk on the old laptop, which I used only for the rare occasions when only Windows would work. When Windows 10 was released, I installed it next to Linux just to keep abreast of developments. But I no longer need or use Windows at all. My current laptop came with Windows 10 installed, but I again wiped the disk and installed Linux alone. I currently use Ubuntu Mate 1804 as my main system for production, but have also used Linux Mint, Fedora, OpenSUSE, and other distributions for production over the years. I'll get into the variety of Linux distributions and desktop interfaces in other videos. My current laptop supports virtual machines, and I use them for demonstrating installation, but I still prefer to install other distributions on external hard drives. I still use most of the Linux applications I started with, or the successors. LibreOffice was forked from OpenOffice.org when Sun Microsystems was bought by Oracle, and Oracle threatened to take OpenOffice.org private. I have used LibreOffice since it was introduced. LibreCAD was forked from QCAD when development of QCAD stagnated. I have used LibreCAD since it was introduced. I still use GIMP and MuseScore and many other applications that I began to use 9 years ago. So that's how I got started with Linux. I'll soon produce other videos that will give you some tips that may help you in getting started with Linux. This is XRAM Tech. Thanks for watching.